Hello guys, this is Andrew Wright with another episode of Review the Right Thing. We're going to be talking about a horror movie today. I had mentioned yesterday on my Instagram how I have not been giving any of the horror movies love lately in this podcast. Basically, the thing I started collecting the most was horror movies back when I kind of first started getting into film. And from there, I kind of exposed myself to other things. I mean, obviously there was a lot that I watched as a kid. I had seen plenty of good movies being younger. I mean, my dad was into a lot of action films and stuff like that. But he was also into a lot of good movies too, so I got to expose myself to quite a few things back in the day. However, when I first started venturing on my own, it was definitely more into the horror genre, and then there I kind of went into more, French New Wave. Horror was definitely my transition to more of the cinephile side of movies, I guess. So, like I mentioned, yesterday I posted on my Instagram, which if you're not following me is just Review the Right Thing, and I talked about how I hadn't done much horror, so felt the need to watch a new horror movie that I had picked up as a recent Blu-ray release of an old 1975 movie, and so I just felt that I should probably go ahead and watch this. I remember liking the movie a lot when I'd first seen it, so I thought that I could benefit from watching the Blu-ray and giving you guys a review of that one, because I highly enjoy it, and I think it's definitely one of the ones that's worth watching, and so let's get started. Satanico Pandemonium from 1975. It is a Mexican film brought to us courtesy of Mondo Macabro with a 4K transfer on a 1080p MPEG-4 encoded Blu-ray. Directed by Gilberto Martinez Solares, written by Jorge Barragan, and score was composed by Gustavo Cesar Carrion. The script was written also by Solares and co-written by his son, so kind of like a Bava thing. Mario Bava was, an Italian director. His son then also went into the movie business. They were both known for their horror movies and giallo films. The Blu-ray is presented with two different cuts of the film. Mondo was presented with two different masters. The first 4K transfer unfortunately had a small little pinhole burn type light blemish in the film stock. So when they rendered it and remastered it, it ends up being about the size of a penny. You can't see it in most scenes. Well, you can if you're really looking for it, but it's hidden pretty well. Some of the darker scenes, it stands out a little bit more. It was really nothing that actually bothered me a whole lot, but it is there. And so Mondo decided to basically go back to the licensor and say, hey, can you get us another print? So the only thing they were able to find was a different 35mm scan that didn't have any print damage, so they restored that. Restoration has its pros and cons for both, and so it's basically just up to you. I did watch the initial print run, the 4K transfer. I did pop on the other one for probably about a half hour, so I'll go over both of those a little bit. The pre-print scan, the original 4K transfer, has a really nice soft filmic grain. The picture really looks good on the 1080p presentation. There's a very natural looking color palette. Landscapes are very lush. The greens are very vibrant and pop out a lot. Blues are nicely saturated and are given an elevated boost. Skin tones on this print seem pretty natural. Facial close-ups are given an added boost. And clothing textures and building textures all look organic. I think they did a pretty good job with this print. Like I said, it does have that little burn mark in there, so it could bother some people. So, like I said, they've also included this other scan, which we'll talk about that a little bit as well. This scan, honestly, didn't do as much for me. Felt close-up still looked really good. Facial detail was rendered pretty nice. However, a lot of the more wide shots, the picture almost feels a little bit muddier. It's definitely a darker picture. There is no blemish throughout the whole movie though, and a lot of the color palette seems to look pretty good actually. Skin tones definitely have a little bit more of an orangish hue to them. Some scenes I feel like it's even more of a bluish hue to them, which helps some scenes and doesn't help others, so this print definitely has more cons than the other one. However, the pros are pretty impressive. I mean, it still is a pretty decent print scan. Obviously, this movie was made in Mexico in 1975 on a very small budget. The director was very prolific in Mexico. He had done 160 movies, so he obviously probably had a little bit more of a budget than, a lot of filmmakers in Mexico, but face it, it's Mexico in 1975. They are a much poorer country. They probably didn't have the budget that I would say a Hollywood movie in 1975 would have. And so things were limited, but that being said, like, this is a very artsy film too. The locations that it's set on and shot in are very beautiful, and you just wouldn't think of it for this type of movie. Basically, the story centers around a nun who has been at a nunnery for a long time. She's obviously very much looked up to, and she starts having these strange visions of this mysterious man. They keep coming over and over again throughout the first, 20 minutes of the movie. She still keeps seeing him in her mind, and this devilish figure, who you do figure out is Satan pretty early on, in order to try to repel these desirable thoughts to turn. A lot of religious groups practice self-flagellation. This was actually a thing that they did back in the day. Their idea was that if they whipped themselves enough times, you never did this, like, you're not beating yourself, but they did feel that it would help cleanse them of their sins. And so it was very much practiced. Obviously, some groups did take this to higher extremes. Hollywood used it for very much a more sleazy, sexual, masochistic kind of reason. Sold a lot of tickets, obviously. TNA, what doesn't, I guess. So that being said, with the picture, the audio on this release is done in a 5.1 master, and it sounds pretty good. The mix is overall pretty pleasing. I feel like dialogue is a little bit bright. It kind of comes across the mix a little bit harsh at times. Same things with sound effects, but it's few and far between. I would say overall the mix does sound pretty good. I had it cranked up pretty loud on my sound bar, and so that could be a result of the screeching, but who doesn't like to watch their movies loud? I want to feel the explosions. I want to feel like I'm there, that's the point. So anyways, those dialogue parts that kind of screech a little bit, some of the sound effects kind of screech a little bit. Like I said, they're infrequent moments in it, and so it's not that big of a deal. Not a ton in terms of bonus features on this disc. However, the packaging itself is pretty nice. It does come with some lobby cards, and it comes with a booklet with an essay from a film critic. He basically talks about similar things that are then discussed by Kat Ellinger, who's also done some commentary on other films that I have, and a girl named Sam Deegan, I think is what it was. They do a podcast called Daughters of Darkness, so one of the features on here is they provide commentary for the entire movie, and they talk about how this movie was so much different than other movies in the nunsploitation genre. It was a genre that was very much anti-religious. They were fighting against censorship things back in the day, and so that was basically the reason for a lot of these movies, the reason for the gratuitous violence or the nudity was basically to either fight, the church or fight censorship laws at the time. And so this movie doesn't really do any of that. It's much more of an artsy film. Like I said, the landscapes are shot very beautifully. A lot of great use of color in this film. And so that's basically what they discuss, is how this movie doesn't necessarily fall into the nunsploitation genre like the rest of the films of the 70s Italy and European films do. And so it kind of like is a thing of its own, kind of off to the side. The last two features are just two small little interviews, one of them with Gilberto's son, Alfonso. He basically just talks about what it was like working with his dad on this, his dad's history. I should have written down how long it was. I didn't. I want to say they were both around like 15 to 20 minutes apiece, so they're smaller featurettes. But they're both really cool. The second of which being an interview with Nigel Wingrove from Redemption Films, and how he started Redemption Films as basically a way to release films that he liked. He tried to release his own film. It was heavily censored. He got in a lot of trouble. Basically, it just is still banned, I'm pretty sure. I'd have to look up what the name of the movie is again. So he ended up, I think it was Visions of Ecstasy, I think is what it's called. So as a result, he basically figured since he couldn't make his own movies, he would release movies that he liked. So he started releasing these movies from like the nunsploitation era. It's kind of how he started his business model and started his Redemption film label. And the rest is history. He's put out a ton of stuff, released a lot of genre movies. So he's released a ton of really great films that otherwise probably would have never seen the light of day. Since I normally take pictures, we'll do something a little bit different. Just because there's a lot to show with this. This is a red case edition, 393 out of 1,000. Mondo Macabro always does a red case limited edition for the first 1,000 orders basically. Then after that, there's a standard retail edition. It does come with some lobby cards. Sorry, I'm looking down. But 2 side lobby cards. There is 9 lobby cards, little booklet, which is pretty nice. I like having that kind of extra stuff in my releases. Get this back in here without, oh my god. And finally, it does have reverse art. So neither of these feature the original DVD art, which I really liked. However, this is a nice change. Back cover then as well. And again, I appreciate you guys watching. This has been another Review the Right Thing. Like I was saying earlier in this episode, if you haven't followed me on Instagram, go ahead and start doing so. You can also follow me on Letterboxd if you want to. I had mentioned that in an early video. It's just ANDD2005. I don't get to really do movie review or do Blu-ray reviews of everything that I watch. Some things I don't own on Blu-ray. Some things don't have any special features. I can't review everything that I'm watching. I don't have enough time in the day. It takes a lot of time to edit these videos and that kind of thing. So anyways, but I really appreciate you guys watching. And like I said, if you want to follow me on either of those other social platforms, you can. And this has been another episode of Review the Right Thing. Thanks again. Have a great one.